Hi, my name is Alex, and today I'm going to talk to you about 5 of the most important instructional design models. The purpose of this video is to compare and contrast these models to provide thorough introductions to their philosophical underpinnings and main components. In doing so, hopefully I'll be able to help you become more acquainted with the role that instructional design models play in facilitating the development and implementation of instructional materials, become more familiar with 5 specific instructional design models, and develop a nuanced understanding of some of the characteristics and differences of each of these models. To do so, I'll provide a basic chart that compares some of the main components of each model, and then flesh those ideas out with individual slides for each model. But first, let's take a quick look at a definition of instructional design in order to give you more context for understanding what an instructional design model is. There are plenty of definitions of instructional design, but this one is practical and concise. The systematic and reflective process of translating principles of learning and instruction into plans for instructional materials, activities, information resources, and evaluation. Now that we've briefly talked about instructional design, let's move on to instructional design models. We'll eventually talk to you about 5 specific models, but just know that there are many instructional design models out there. Most instructional design models include the analysis of instructional problems and the design, development, implementation, and evaluation of instructional procedures and materials intended to solve those problems. The specific instructional design models that we'll be looking at today are ADDIE, Dick and Carey's Systems Approach Model, Merrill's Pebble in the Pond Model, Rapid Prototyping, and SAMR. Let's take a quick look at each of these models and their contrasting components and philosophical underpinnings now, and then we'll delve into more specifics on each model. The ADDIE model is a traditional design systems approach to producing instructional content. It is good for those new to instructional design as it has fairly clear sequential steps. Dick and Carey's systems approach model is in some ways a fleshed out version of ADDIE. Also good for novices, but like ADDIE, it can be time consuming. Merrill's Pebble in the Pond model is distinctive in its focus on building your instructional content around one big problem, a task or skill your students need to learn. Everything is scaffolded off of that. And now for a few different models. Rapid prototyping is less a sequence of clearly defined steps and more a design philosophy that is built for speed and agility. Instructional content is designed, developed, and evaluated in a continual feedback loop. Something like rapid prototyping might involve components such as the ones in ADDIE. They're just executed in a different way. Other instructional design models could apply to traditional in-person instruction, the design of learning objects, and e-learning. But SAMR is distinct because it is designed to help evaluate and choose instructional technology. That is its sole focus. Now let's take a deeper dive on each of these models. We'll start with ADDIE, which is one of the most well-known ID models. One interesting thing to know about ADDIE is that not everyone actually considers it a model. Instead, it is an illustration of the conceptual components of many instructional design development models, a sort of set of building blocks that other models incorporate. However, a quick Google search for instructional design models almost invariably starts with ADDIE. It is one of the most well-known of all of the models. ADDIE stands for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. In the analysis stage, the instructional designer is analyzing learner characteristics and the instructional environment. In the design stage, the instructional designer is designing learning objectives, learning activities, and things like digital learning objects, storyboards, and scripts. The development phase is when these plans are turned into tangible objects and revised if needed. The implementation phase is when these plans are put into action in the classroom, and the evaluation phase involves formative and summative assessments. While ADDIE is visually portrayed as a circle, it has sometimes been criticized as being somewhat linear in nature. It also can be a time-consuming process. That being said, ADDIE is thought of as especially useful for novice instructional designers because of its clear and logical sequence, and its components inform many other instructional design models. A close look at some of the steps of Dick and Carey's systems approach model makes clear that it is, to some extent at least, a more fleshed out version of ADDIE. Because it's more fleshed out, it might be useful for instructional designers that started with ADDIE. It does, however, draw some of the same criticisms that ADDIE does, namely that it can be a time-consuming process. Merrill's Pebble in the Pond model is based off of the author's first principles of instruction ideas. The Pebble in the Pod model is distinctive because it avoids creating objectives before developing instructional content. Merrill recommends avoiding the early creation of objectives because those objectives would tend to change as the project ran its course. The other main feature is that everything is based on identifying one big problem that your learners have to overcome, one skill they need to master, one bit of a knowledge they need to acquire. Then instruction is scaffolded off of that one big problem by focusing on the component skills your learners will need to acquire in order to solve the big problem. Rapid prototyping as an instructional design model is also very different. It is less a strict sequence of design components and more of a design and development philosophy. The big advantage here is speed and agility, something that traditional ID models don't have. As the main proponents of rapid prototyping have said, it is rarely argued that the systems approach is efficient. Rapid prototyping is all about designing prototypes, gathering feedback, and incorporating that feedback in order to iterate on the earlier prototype. And then the loop continues. Consider a digital learning object like a tutorial. The first prototype might be a video. Feedback would then be gathered, which might result in the creation of a more interactive video, or even a different type of tutorial that was based on the same subject matter. The criticism of rapid prototyping is that it could, in some cases, lead to designers just trying things out. Good instructional design still requires careful planning. Finally, I chose SAMR as the last instructional design model to focus on specifically because it is designed for evaluating and choosing educational technology. In the substitution phase, you're basically using technology for technology's sake. It isn't adding anything of real value to the educational process. Augmentation is the area in which technology has improved learning outcomes and activities in some way, but hasn't fundamentally changed them. I might consider something like online polling versus asking students to raise their hands to be somewhere in this category, although that could edge into modification territory. Speaking of which, modification is a more fundamental change, while redefinition is the area in which technology has fundamentally changed a learning task. My example here, which is influenced by my work as a research librarian, is the difference between a research journal that is handwritten or typed and a research video journal that could be shared with anyone. Evaluating technology by where it stands on the SAMR scale can be a useful way of choosing tech-based activities in the classroom. We'll wrap things up by employing one more, slightly different comparison chart. These are simply my opinions, at times based on readings, and is not an authoritative guideline for ID model usage. One appeal of using ADDIE would be that it should familiarize you with some important instructional design components that you'll see in other ID models. It, along with Dick and Carey's model, and even Merrill's ID models, are meticulous and somewhat time-consuming ways of preparing instructional plans and activities. Merrill's model is interesting in how it avoids creating learning outcomes at the outset, and also in how it relies on scaffolded instruction in order to teach students problem-solving skills. It seems to me that rapid prototyping would be most useful for designers working on digital learning objects that also have immediate feedback loops available to them. And finally, SAMR is specifically for those working on selecting educational technology. Hopefully you now know more about instructional design models and their uses. This list of readings informed my thoughts on this subject and could be useful for you as well.